The energy industry is traditionally seen as being the enemy of the environment, and it's easy to see why, with the emissions, wildlife damage, oil spills, nuclear disasters, and the list goes on. But it is also important to understand how critical oil, gas, energy in general is to the way we live.
We're talking about our old reliable friends, oil and gas, and the traditional energy industry. We've come to rely so much on them. I mean, what would our daily lives be like if we didn't have oil and gas and other related hydrocarbons like coal? So we've had decades, even longer, a century of reliance on these sources of energy. Let's look at the talk about greater electrification. And it's not a bad thing, actually. It's great. With a background in electrical engineering myself, I've always been very partial to electrical solutions. But a big part of that is also around, we just can't go and plug in everywhere. We still will need, to an extent, internal combustion engines and other technologies to help with a viable, sustainable, cost-affordable energy mix. Remember, it's not just about transportation or about heating our homes or about running our industry. There is a whole range of other aspects of the energy value chain we need to consider. And again, that's where risk management plays a role in helping to develop strategy. And then, of course, it all boils down to how can we feed the world as well, and we need to think about that. Agriculture is a big challenge, as is climate change. But what do we need to make fertilizer? Yeah, we rely quite heavily on hydrocarbons. Thinking about oil and gas just for a moment, what we're now hearing is talk of moving back towards things like North Sea oil and gas exploration. People are reevaluating the economic viability of doing that and looking at whether or not it's more sustainable from an economic perspective to do it, and whether or not it will contribute to security of supply for energy. So providing more affordable, readily available, and bringing back a little bit more of a self-sufficiency in energy for the United Kingdom, for example. We're seeing the same things afoot in the US. The administration there are currently looking at the licensing for exploration and production. And there is quite a strong argument in favour of doing all a government can to encourage the oil and gas operators to go out and start to produce more, to try and meet the short-term demands, not just domestically in the case of the US, but also for other parts of the world, such as Europe. Which of course leads us into this conversation about the current geopolitical situation. I mean, what's been happening in the Ukraine has been, I think, tragic. It's been, I think, a wake-up call for all of us on a number of fronts. But if we look at it purely from an energy security point of view and from a risk management point of view, actually the message is now driven home that we can no longer just rely on Russia, for example, as being a provider for about 50 to 60% of Europe's energy needs. In some cases, it's greater. It's up around 70% for gas in some markets. So we need to actually look at how we can wean ourselves off this reliance on one or two producers in particular. And of course, that's driving the whole conversation around how we can further exploit the known reserves and readily available reserves of oil and gas from other parts of the world. The Middle East, for example, makes a lot of sense. But of course, that's not very, I suppose, palatable for a number of people. Yeah, we're looking at how can we provide a more sustainable approach to things. And Alex will come on to that in just a moment. So fossil fuels, oil and gas, let's be very honest about it, will always form a part of our energy mix.
So there are a lot of negatives with recent events that we've seen. However, there are also positives. And it's these positives that I'd like to focus on. One of the positives is ESG. Not only ESG reporting, but the fact that investment funds, for example, the Norwegian Oil Fund, one of the largest funds in the world, are now beginning to invest and divest based on ESG. This puts a lot of pressure on organizations, including energy companies, whether it be oil and gas or otherwise. The focus on net zero is still there. The targets are still there, both in the UK and across Europe. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like the United Arab Emirates, they are investing heavily in solar. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they are also investing in new cities that are going to be net zero, using the latest technology, green energy, and a sustainable city for the future. They are giga projects unlike anything we're seeing elsewhere in the world. And we can only hope that the technology that they innovate and invest in trickles down to more cities around the world that are already established. And that brings me on to technologies, which is another area of encouragement. Whether it's wind turbines and the fact that previously their blades were non-recyclable, they're now looking at using material which is recyclable. And when supply is high and demand is low, usually we lose excess energy. So we're now looking at technology that can store that energy, whether it's battery or something else. On top of the fact that we're also looking at solutions, which I'll talk about a little bit later, such as Bitcoin mining. Other technological advances include Industry 4. We're seeing things like smart oil fields, where artificial intelligence, blockchain, and other technologies such as drone technology are all working together to being able to produce more efficiently and cleaner. Another technology that's been discussed actually by the World Economic Forum, but is also being experimented with by, for example, Exxon and Equinor, the ex-Statoil from Norway, is that of Bitcoin. The idea is that instead of flaring, we can actually mine Bitcoin. And then the profits made from Bitcoin can be invested in ESG initiatives. Another use of Bitcoin that people are discussing at the moment is for renewable energy. A lot of the time when we're producing wind energy, we lose that energy if supply outstrips demand. We're not storing that energy. So the idea is that instead of losing that energy, we actually mine Bitcoin. And if we can mine Bitcoin with that otherwise lost energy, we're able to actually use it for something profitable, assuming Bitcoin remains viable. This then allows the profits to be invested in new wind turbines, which could potentially accelerate renewable energy and green energy. Of course, this is all experimentation and it might turn out not to be what people are expecting. And of course, there's the negatives of Bitcoin from the perception of ESG as well and the environmental damage it might be causing. But these are the types of technologies that we're looking at that are beginning to show some promise. And consumers are beginning to become much more aware of the environment, social responsibility, and everything related to what Earth Day signifies. And we really do hope for a green future, a clean future, and a planet that everyone can continue to enjoy.